came from a family of 5 brothers.
Yes.
He is the last to die. Donald Nixon, who was younger than he, and I'm sure all of you remember him, died in 1987 at the age of 72. He had been suffering from pneumonia. 2 other brothers had died when they were very young, one of tuberculosis and one of meningitis.
Yes.
He grew up very poor.
Very poor. The father, Francis, tried lemon raising, and not successfully. In fact, it's on the very land that the family owned that the Yorba Linda Library is built. And he went from that to running a store, and then he became a streetcar conductor. And I think that President Nixon never fully recovered from a background, a youth that he felt was full of deprivation. Somehow he felt personally insulted by the lot in life, however much he battled to rise above it, and regardless of the strength he showed in rising above it.
Why was he so insecure about his meager upbringings? He had every reason to be proud that he was able to ascend to the presidency.
I think that Lyndon Johnson had some of the same qualities, and it is interesting that they were back-to-back presidents. There was a worship of wealth that was part of the era that both grew up in, and not possessing wealth and all that wealth offers was a handicap.
And there is Tricia Nixon Cox, Edward Cox. They have one son, 15 years old, David Eisenhower, Julie Eisenhower. They have 3 children, a son and 2 daughters. His daughters have succeeded in living very quiet and private lives. We so rarely see them. And they really haven't changed that much. They're both in their 40s. Tricia is now 48. She just turned 48. Julie is 45. Tricia just bears such a striking resemblance to her father. Tricia once said, "My father is one of the most compassionate people I've ever met." And Professor Graff, I covered President Nixon all those years, particularly during Watergate, and unfortunately for reporters, we are unable to see that side.
This was shown to very close friends, but there were very few friends. Arthur Burns, who served as professor at Columbia for many years, was chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors under President Eisenhower, and who was put on the Fed as chairman by President Nixon, always said that if Mr. Nixon could have had friends who gave him love, he could have been a remarkably different man.
What about Charles B.B. Rebozo and Robert Alpenock?
I have never understood those friendships. They certainly intellectually never seemed Mr. Nixon's equal, but I think they were wealthy men, and like General Grant, like Lyndon Johnson, Mr. Nixon worshipped those of wealth.
He seemed to be embarrassed and somewhat intimidated by the Eastern GOP. We're not just talking about the Democrats, not the patrician JFK, but the Eastern political establishment.
And Eastern intellectuals. I've been aware of this in everything that I read by Nixon and about Nixon. There's no question at all that he was a shy man. I think that probably was part of this resentment. But my thought is that he was equal to them in mind and in energy and in skill as a politician, and should have been able to come home.
Patricia Nixon was married at the White House Rose Garden. It was noted that she and her husband, Edward Kotz, shared this passion for privacy that she shared with her father, and that he, President Nixon, was actually an introvert in an extrovert's business, Professor Graff.
It's interesting that the young couple, the bridal couple, honeymooned at Camp David, where I guess they could find as much seclusion as is possible in public life. I was thinking as I watched the Hail to the Chief experience here, that's an old Scottish air that's been used for presidents for 150 years. It salutes presidents as military leaders, and we bury our chiefs as military chieftains.
He was our 37th Commander-in-Chief.
Yes.
El Toro, incidentally, Professor Graff, is one of the military bases that is closing. It's a casualty of the end of the Cold War, and it was President Nixon who contributed greatly to the end of the Cold War.
There's no question that this man who started out as an anti-communist and a ferocious opponent of the Soviet Union, in his last days was in what remained of the Soviet Union and urged the administration now in power to give aid to the Russians. What a turnabout.
And as the motorcade leaves El Toro for the trip to the Nixon Library in Yorba Linda, let us check in with White House correspondent Bill Plant, who is at the library. Bill?
Connie, the library is built, as Professor Graff noted earlier, on land owned by the Nixon family, which was a failed citrus orchard. The library was built by some of Mr. Nixon's wealthy friends after other locations turned down the idea of having a Nixon presidential library. Mrs. Nixon, of course, is buried here. The house in which President Nixon was born has been restored, and the burial plots are not far from there. It'll take them about an hour to get here from El Toro. They'll arrive here, and the casket will be borne into the main rotunda, the main reception area of the library, and there Mr. Nixon will be placed, and the public will be able to pay their respects for almost 24 hours. We were corrected earlier by the Military Department of Washington. Mr. Nixon will not lie in state here. Apparently that can only happen in the Capitol. He will, the military says, lie in repose. But in any case, the public will be able to view the casket. It will be closed for about 24 hours before the funeral begins tomorrow. Connie?
All right, thank you, Bill. Professor Graff, President Nixon actually came to peace with his position. He expressed shame but never guilt over Watergate. And one thing that he said just before he left the White House, when he spoke to his staff in the East Room, you remember, he said, always remember that others may hate you, but those who hate you don't win unless you hate them.
I have a great fear, though, that when historians take a close look at the Nixon administration, they're going to say, alas, it was his hate, his hostility to others that destroyed him. He was right in what he said.
He just didn't practice it.
Yes.
Well, he was born in Yorba Linda. He will be buried there. You remember in that East Room speech, he also said, my mother was a saint.
Yes.
And he remembered his hard childhood. Well, he'll be buried there with his wife, Pat, who died, as we said, in just last June. CBS News coverage of the farewell to President Nixon will continue. We'll be back on the air at about 4:45 Eastern Time with the arrival.